All right, today you're going to look at multiplying and dividing integers. Now remember, an integer is just a whole number, but it also has the negatives. So really, we're just going over the rules for multiplying and dividing with negatives. Now, just like it always has been, if you have a positive, and remember this dot means multiply, if you have a positive times a positive, you're going to get another positive. We already knew that. Now, if we have a negative times a positive, like if we have -3 times 2, what we can do here, just think about 3 times 2. We get 6. Now, we've been saying that a negative means opposite. So if we have the opposite thrown in here, what's the opposite of positive 6? -6. So that's one way you can think about it. Well, here's another way. Let me fill this in first. So if we have a negative times a positive, we get a negative. Now let's do a different example here for another way to think about it. Let's think about a positive times a negative. Let's say we have, I don't know, 2 times -4. When you multiply something, what you're doing is adding it to itself. 2 times 4 is 4 plus 4. You add 4 twice to itself. But this isn't just 4, it's -4. So here's another way to think about it. Instead of just, hey, 2 times 4 is 8, that means opposite, this is an explanation of why, if you're confused as to what I was talking about up here. -4 plus -4, we've gone over this. If you add 2 negatives, you just get more negative. So a positive times a negative is also negative. All right. Now, probably the most confusing one, and we've kind of already talked about it. What about a negative times a negative? Let's think about this one. Let's say we have -3 times -2. So we've already said negatives mean opposite. So let's just do 3 times 2 for a minute here. We get 6. Now we have opposite and another opposite. Now let's take a look at what happens on a number line. And we don't have to fill all these numbers in here. We're just going to think about this. So the first opposite would take our 6, and you already know the opposite of 6 is -6. So there's the first opposite. So the first opposite lands us back on -6. But we have two opposites here. So if I take the opposite, I land on -6. If I do that again, if I take the opposite of the opposite of -6, switches me back to +6. You don't have to write this down. I'm just illustrating this plus sign here, this positive sign. Again, whenever you do multiply two negatives, you don't have to write the positive sign. You got to write the 6 and all this stuff, but not the positive sign. I'm just illustrating here. So when we multiply integers, so we have signed numbers here. If you have a negative times a negative, the first negative means opposite, so that would shoot you back to the negatives. And then the second negative means the opposite of that first opposite, which just flips you back to positive. So a negative times a negative is a positive. So let's sum this up. For multiplying, if we had a positive times a positive, we got a positive. You've done that for years. Now we just said the other way we can get a positive is from a negative times a negative. These are both the same sign. If you have different signs, we just saw if you have a positive times a negative or a negative times a positive, you get negatives. So here's some examples. We say we have 5 times -4. All you got to do, 5 times 4, 20. Now we have a positive times a negative. We have different signs. Positive times negative is negative. Or let's say we have a -4 times a +4. 4 times 4 is 16. We have different signs again. We have a negative times a positive. That gives you a negative. Now, don't let all this sign stuff confuse you here. If we have a positive times a positive again, just like you've done for years, stays positive. And then we have a negative times another negative. 5 times 10 is 50. A negative times a negative, again, same sign. Opposite once. You don't have to go through this every time. I'm just reminding you why this works the way it works. Opposite sends you the negative. The second opposite sends you back to the positive. So positive 50. Negative times a negative is a positive. Just kind of just like subtracting a negative, you changed it to add the positive. Now, the good news is division, and we'll talk about this more, division and multiplication are kind of like the same thing. We've already talked about how they're inverse operations. Like if I multiply something by 2, or excuse me, if I take half of something like multiplying it by a half. That's the same thing as dividing it into 2. You get halves. So like I said, the good news about this, unlike addition and subtraction, this also works for dividing. So same rules for division. If I have, say, 10 divided by -5, 10 divided by 5 is 2. We have different signs here, so we get negative. If I have, let's say, 20 -20 divided by 2, a negative and a positive, different signs, we're going to get a negative. And if we have same sign again, a negative divided by a negative, just like a negative times a negative, we get a positive. And then again, the ones that you've been doing for years now, like if we have 8 divided by 2, it's just positives, everything's positive, just like you've done before. Now we can also, write this as a fraction. Let's say we had -12 over -6. Fractions mean divide. Negative divided by a negative. Same signs for multiplying or dividing. Negative divided by a negative, +2. If we had, say, 14 divided by -7, different signs, you get a negative. 14 divided by 7 is 2. So those are the rules for multiplication and division with negatives. Luckily, it's kind of easier than with the addition and subtraction. Same sign, positive times positive, or positive divide by positive, you get a positive. Same sign, negative divided by negative, or negative times negative, positive. Same sign, positive. If you have one of each, if you have different signs, negative. And again, this also works for division as well.